This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. Cordy, welcome to another video. Today I was thinking about this for a little while because as you may or may not know, on the channel I've tried quite a few modelers, sort of like Leonardo DiCaprio of modelers, as I kind of find it interesting to see what the state of modeling is, and so I'm someone who has had a Kemper, had a Quad Cortex, have Helix HX Stomp, have Boss GX100, GT1000 core, and have the Fractal stuff. And although I do make videos for Fractal on their own channel, G66, distributors of Fractal. Line 6 have very rarely paid me any money. Boss do actually sponsor a few videos with their creating Tonex sets. But in general, I feel like I'm fairly open about all of that stuff and willing to kind of talk about the things that I really like. So in this video I wanted to talk about kind of my favourite modelers and what I like them for, and maybe talk about some of the negatives with some of the other stuff, maybe if it comes to it. But the top of the tree for me in terms of price and what you get for the money, I think is the HX Stomp. Now there are a few other smaller modelers that I think are worth a look, like the Boss GT1000 core is about the same size as this, actually more powerful. So if you can get to be familiar with the interface and the way that Boss actually do things, I think that's also a pretty good thing for the money. It's just that I use the HX Stomp most of all. The Helix is quite a mature kind of product at this point, so there are lots of amps in there. There's now the new cab modeling system, which basically kind of overhauled things in a way that means you can actually fit more within presets now, which is a really good thing. And yeah, for gigging live, I think the HX Stomp is just about one button short of being properly usable in some ways. So you can use an expression pedal with it, or you could, plug in another switch to do bits and pieces. But actually live, I tend to use the HX Stomp XL. But at home, this is the thing that I reach for most of all. And I think it's a really very good priced product. I've found in my own sort of A/B testing that this is pretty accurate to the stuff that I've actually had. So whether that was something like the Prince of Tone, or a Tube Screamer, or a Klon, or a Mesa Boogie Lone Star, enough that Mesa Boogie Mark series amps as well, enough that I'm pretty convinced that the guys at Line 6 do a really good job of modeling amps, and their effects I really love as well, particularly the reverbs and delays. Now that they brought on some folks from Digitech and Lexicon, I think they've really taken it to the next level. So for price, I think Helix. Also, a feature that is almost non-existent in the rest of the modeling world is that you've got basically a VST version of the Helix available as well, so Helix native. Now this is something, of course, we know that Neural DSP have been talking about for quite a while, like having that plugin being available on the unit, this kind of thing that has become a bit of a meme that they've not as yet been able to achieve that, however many years it is since inception. Line 6 kind of came out of the gate more or less with this capability, and it is still something I think takes the modeling kind of computer connection to the next level, because it essentially means that in Helix native I can run things that I can run on stage as well. I know it sounds like maybe sort of trivial, but at the same time I think it's actually something that we are yet to fully recognize the power of that as a concept. Anyway, so Helix you hear me talk about all the time, but I'm a big fan of it. I think there's in excess of 80 amp models in there now, and the effects library has grown massively to the point where only, I think, one other manufacturer really competes. And now, if you're into modeling at all, you will have, of course, heard of Fractal. And Fractal, I think this is one of the other best value products on the market. Now, the FM3 is considerably more expensive than the HX Stomp, but what you do get with Fractal is that they've got nearly, I think they might even have 300 amp models by now. So if you're looking for variety, if you're looking for tweakability, if you're looking for the best oversampling on the market, so oversampling is basically, well, there's videos on this, but in theory, what it should mean, if you can hear this stuff, when you're turning up the gain on these kind of things, that basically you should have a slightly clearer signal and you get less aliasing, because basically this handles that sort of stuff. There are videos from people that know stuff on aliasing, and it's one of the things that the Quad Cortex doesn't do a great job of. It's one of the things that Tonex doesn't do a great job of. It was a recent experiment that someone did on this. I think Cliff has said that Atomic, the amplifier, was the other thing that did a really good job, but in recent graphs he's sort of shown that Line 6, I think it was 3.15 was where they made some real upgrades in this area. So even from Cliff himself, he's shown in graphs that Line 6 have actually made considerable improvements. So Fractal and Line 6 happen to be now at the top of the kind of aliasing thing, if you're sensitive to that. Anyway, as well as having sort of like rack quality, delays, reverbs, all that stuff, this is the kind of stuff that you see people like The Edge, Steve Vai, John Petrucci, loads and loads and loads of players use. And I think Fractal has been considered to be pretty much the go-to for touring, alongside, of course, Kemper. So I think this represents incredibly good value actually for what you get. I know the Fractal stuff in general is maybe a little bit more expensive because of the way they do things, but I do also think that you get the most regular updates and you get the most kind of anything. The one sort of area where people do take some time to get used to it is potentially the interface, but this is still miles better than Fractal used to be with their color screens, and their desktop editor is incredibly useful. And we think about other products that maybe don't even have desktop editors yet. So you think of Headrush, Quad Cortex, again, this is a thing that they've been talking about, you know, it being the most powerful modeler in the world, yet at launch it didn't come out with a looper, it didn't come with a desktop editor. They're still kind of tweaking that desktop editor. So there's real things that the more mature products can actually do, as well as actually Fractal have an incredibly flexible foot capability. You've got basically 8 foot switch layouts, and you can press them in, long press them, and switch between layouts. You can do short presses and long presses. So for me, when I'm setting up gig presets for the Fractal stuff. Basically, you can toggle stuff as well, which, yeah, it's just really powerful. I have this foot switch here, switches between 2 scenes. This one switches between 2 scenes, and this one does as well. So you have 6 scenes available with 3 foot switches easily. So Fractal for tweakability, for flexibility, the most flexible grid going, the most flexible foot switching layouts, and the most of anything. So I think Fractal is definitely worth a look if you're considering it. And for me, if you've already got a Fractal unit, I wouldn't say that you can do better than it, if that makes sense. I really love the Helix as well, and I'd be happy with the Helix, but I think a lot of kind of Fractal users are relatively confident once they get their unit that this works for them, and that you can be fairly confident that, you know, it's got some of the best performance, the best aliasing performances, and all that sort of stuff, as well as just having the most of anything, like the most Dumble amps, the most Marshall amps, the most Fender amps, and basically almost all of the amps that you might want are going to be in here. The Kemper is still definitely in the rigs of many touring musicians. The only downside for me with the Kemper, I think that it's a little bit underrated in a bunch of aspects. So I think the effects on the Kemper are actually way better than people give them credit for. The reverbs and delays I really like, and the more modern kind of drives and the fuzz, those things are really cool. The downside for me with the Kemper is that the rig manager got for me very difficult to use on my computer and kind of slow. And the Kemper itself kind of slows down the more kind of rigs you put on it. However, it is still really useful in terms of having 5 gapless switching rigs. That's really quite powerful. I do think it, of course, does still sound as good as it did when it came out. And although you see people kind of dogging on the Kemper in some ways, I do think that it is a really decent sounding unit still. And there's plenty of life, I think, in it still for folks that are, you know, less concerned about building their own kind of tones and stuff like that. And that was the downside for me as someone who likes to build stuff. Is that I'm not so much a person that loves the kind of profiling aspect of things. I prefer, and I'm relatively confident that people like Fractal and Line 6 are easily capable of building incredibly accurate modeling. So for me, the fact that it can do that kind of the trick that a Kemper or a Quad Cortex does, it doesn't necessarily mean a huge deal to me, especially now that things like Tonex and the Neural Amp Modeler can also do what is shown to be as accurate, maybe even more accurate than either of the other 2 major players. And although they still have some aliasing things to work out, like the oversampling stuff, so it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But for me, what was at first interesting about the Kemper and the Quad Cortex, as modeling has sort of got better and better over the years, I don't really feel that I so much need that trick in my life, if that makes sense. The Quad Cortex as well has some real issues with flexibility. So I did some videos on this when it happened, but the hybrid kind of foot switch mode that came out has really not been much of a vibe for me. You can't assign more than one thing to a foot switch. So, you know, with any of the other devices, I think basically you could have like an overdrive and a delay assigned to the same switch and all that sort of stuff. The hybrid mode as well, it basically has like a scenes mode and a foot switch mode that you can put together, but you lose half of your foot switching. It's just a little bit, I don't know, a little bit weird at the moment. And also Neural have had their problems, you know, in terms of security, which you may or may not have seen recently. I think the form factor of the unit is really nice, and the idea of having a smaller footprint but with more power, I think, is super attractive to me. And that was what was weird to me about the Headrush Prime. It seemed to me that it's sort of gone against what most of the trends seem to be. When you look at like even the Fractal FM9 is kind of smaller than units that came before. I think the Fractal FM9, although pretty expensive, I think this is another huge candidate for the thing that could do everything for you. And as a live kind of unit, I think this is pretty much perfect. I might like an expression pedal built in or something, but that might not look right. But in terms of got your FM3 capability here, and then this additional foot switching added on, and it has double the power of an FM3, so you can run dual amps and all that stuff. So this could basically do everything you need it to live, and has the benefit of being like Fractal's got all of their, you know, amazing algorithms, all of the amp modeling, all that really cool stuff. So I think the FM9's worth a look, if money is no object, potentially. One slight downside that I see for Boss is that they don't tend to keep updating their modelers with like new amp models and stuff like that, which I think is a little bit of a missed opportunity, because that is what really helps keep Fractal and Line 6 for me fresh. So that'd be an area that I'd like to see. Neural are still trying to catch up with the promises that it made. Kemper has been really consistent for continuing to improve the product, and I think folks that own a Kemper really appreciate that. So I think that's a roundup for me of my favorite modelers and why I think I prefer the Fractal and Line 6 stuff. For me, it works really well live. I love scribble strips as well. I think for live use, those are incredibly useful. So anytime that someone involves a scribble strip, the better. Let me know your favorite modeler in the comments if you've got one, and why you love it. And maybe you're someone who uses a few. If you've got a favorite, I'd love to know your thoughts. I was using a Fractal FM3 to start in the intro, and then for the last solo I used the Helix with the litigator lead. You can grab all my presets in Gumroad. Also, this is the last day for now that you'll see me talking about TrueFire, I think. I'm going to be doing some pre-rolls for another company under TrueFire Studios, Artistworks, but the codes JNC40 and JNC100 will still apply once they're out of this sale phase, so you can still get really good deals on the All Access Pass and any of their individual courses. Cheers for stopping by.